and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known in this realm as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me once more for another edition of Hail to Stephen King. Dan Rizzo, guys, here for the first time on its new day. That's right, on a Saturday, and this is only a preemptive strike because in 2018, this show that I have been doing for pretty much all of 2017 is going to be going bi-weekly. That's right, so there is going to be two different episodes that I do every week as opposed to just one. Cecil and I have decided that it is going to be on Saturdays and on Tuesdays, so you have a little bit of space between your episodes and stuff, and so there will be one themed episode, and then there's going to be one strict just Q&A episode where I'm gonna go back to picking a comment from all of you viewers and just answering that and expanding on that. But today's topic that I am so very excited to talk about, and I know it's going to be polarizing, it's going to piss a lot of peeps off, but you know what? Whatever. This is my opinion. I'm entitled to it, but I love and adore hearing all of yours. Today, we are talking about the 10 best Stephen King villains. That's right. The 10 best villains in all of Stephen King lore, all of his novels, because earlier this year, I finally finished my 7+ year journey of reading everything Stephen King, including the row that you cannot see, but I'm working on a new set for next year, so hopefully it'll be in proper accord, and you can even see this bottom row that has all kinds of cool things like the 25th anniversary Cemetery Dance did of it, and From a Buick 8, and Doohickey, which I love Doohickey, but I digress. Today, we are talking about the 10 best Stephen King villains of all time. Now, the inception for this particular video was the fact that last week on Hail to Stephen King, I did a 30th anniversary retro review of Misery. And I reread the book, as I have for, 24, 25 different Stephen King books that I've read this year. It's like been the largest consumption of King that I've ever done, because in all of the years past before I started doing the show, I was like, okay, I'll read a King book, and then I would switch to a graphic novel, or I would read, I don't know, like Phantoms by Dean Koontz, or I would read Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, or I would read, a Potter book, or, some sci-fi, or whatever the hell it may be. I switched it up, but it was basically the final stretch of sorts this past year, plus with the fact that it was the Return of the King, and that we had the Dark Tower film coming, we had the remake of it, all these different things. I was like, okay, the stars are aligning, and therefore I need to consume as much King as possible. Plus the fact that, he had Sleeping Beauties come out this year, he had Gwendy's Button Box, both of which I wasn't really that impressed with. But nonetheless, they were still both pretty damn good. So, best villains ever for Stephen King in a 10-to-1 descending order. And as I said, I know this list is going to ruffle some feathers, which excites me because I love the discussion about his work and I love differing opinions. I have to have at least a couple. I know Cecil hates them so much. He hates the honorable mentions, but I gotta mention Sloat from Talisman. I thought he was a pretty damn good villain. And this is just off the top of my head. Barlow, obviously. But then again, Barlow in Salem Slot, he doesn't really emerge until, the back half of the book. So, I was like, I can't include him in there. And I purposefully did not choose something that was like the Overlook Hotel, for instance, which has all of this spiritual presence there, because that probably would have been on. But without further ado, let's just get right to it, guys. And at number 10, I have Leland Gaunt from Needful Things, portrayed amazingly in a film that was maybe just okay. It is a 1993 film, if I'm not mistaken, but that's beside the point. Gaunt, I'm probably butchering the term. I actually have not listened to the audiobook of this, which is in my rereads of Stephen King stuff. I have purposefully done because you can hear proper pronunciation, hopefully, at least from these readers. But Leland is very fascinating as far as a villain goes for me, because of the fact that not only, spoilers, he gets away, which is really interesting and rarely happens in the Stephen King canon. But just the way that he is able to entice and appeal, he's very much like the way Satan tried to tempt Jesus in, and when he was out in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights not eating and everything. And it's been done very well in various films, and that's me reaching back to my religious upbringing and stuff. But another good film where I've seen it done in a similar fashion was, and in a similar religious fashion at least, not in like I'm going to your store that has odds and sods and trinkets and things of that nature. But End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger had a similar kind of enticing dynamic, at least for me, with Gabriel Byrne. Really underrated Schwarzenegger movie. And as far as just appealing to somebody in an interesting fashion and, enticing and tempting them to just be willing to, grab something and go for something and obtain something that they, that they desire oh so very much and that they don't maybe necessarily need. And so, I also love the fact that it takes place in Castle Rock. It's the last Castle Rock story, as King dubbed it at the time. The fact that you've got Pangborn coming back. He was the replacement sheriff after Cujo killed the previous one. He was in the dead zone. And so that was cool. You've got returning characters in this. Like, you've got Ace Merrill, who I've talked about many times, and the fact that he was in a short story in Skeleton Crew that I'm trying to remember the title. It's where the guy goes to the mausoleum with the mysterious girl. It's eluding me. I know you guys are going to correct me in the comments, but I didn't write that in my notes here. But he almost becomes like a Droog of Gaunt, and the fact that they picked no qualms about just killing a kid, and he's like, I want this baseball card, and just the enticement factor of him is what I found so fascinating. The transformation aspect once he really got there, and Sydal, he did a great job portraying that character. As Ed Harris was decent as Pangborn, and it's got an interesting cast. I feel like it's an underrated King adaptation as far as to the big screen goes, but it's not one that I'm clamoring for a remake or something for. However, he is iconic in my opinion because the novel is stacked, and it's maybe one of the most unique villains I think that King has ever written. And this, just when he's escaping on his little like chariot type thing at the end and just laughing and presumably going to another town to do the same damn thing, the Wheel of Ka, the cycle occurs once again. Gaunt, yeah, great villain. So number 9 is a newbie to the list. That is right. We are talking Brady Hartsfield, guys. Yeah, Brady Hartsfield. He is in all 3 of the Mr. Mercedes, Bill Hodges trilogy, which entailed, Mr. Mercedes, and then we ended with, goodness, I have to double check and look over. Yeah, Finders Keepers. It's terrible on my part to not remember that part. I was thinking End of Watch, but End of Watch was the 3rd one. So he was only barely in Finders Keepers, though, which is probably why the title was eluding me. I really liked Finders Keepers, though, even though you only see Brady when Hodges is visiting him in his, catatonic, lying in wait type state. But nonetheless, they reminded you that we're in the same universe, we're in the same city and in the Midwest, and just the fact that this demented, depraved, insane kid just goes and mows down all these people who are waiting in line at a job fair in the cold. It's one of the nastiest things that King has ever written, at least as far as hitting you in the heart. And the fact that for all 3 books he went back and showed different perspectives from that same incident. I thought it was really cool and really fascinating, and that's one that I'm really excited to talk about with Marsha Parker. And she just had a child, and so you guys haven't seen her on the channel much recently, but she read all 3 of those books before me. And so first season of the show was great. You had Harry Treadaway, I believe. Yeah, he was on the one with super hottie Eva Green, and oh goodness, it's eluding me. It was the one with all of the different monsters on it, in a classical fashion. Penny Dreadful, that's it. And Yeah, I think he was either Frankenstein or Dr. Frankenstein. I haven't watched it. I've only researched it and read about it. But yeah, the dude is a hell of an actor. Unfortunately, he replaced Anton Yelchin, who was originally going to portray the character, but after his very untimely passing, that didn't end up transpiring. There's a part of me that still, as much as I love Anton and loved pretty much everything he did, wonders what he would have brought to the role. But Treadaway brought a very cynical, snide, brooding presence to that AT&T series that David E. Kelly, I believe, dude from Ally McBeal, and he's done various other things. But yes, and a weird dynamic with his mother, that's for sure. And I mean, if a guy is going to go bomb an arena that is having a boy band playing, you're going to just kill all the... man, he's an ambitious villain, and he's a twisted villain. I didn't necessarily like what they did with him in End of Watch, where, you know, he was like borderline, like... It was so weird because in the 2 earlier entries, Stephen King kept Mr. Mercedes and Finders Keepers very grounded. Very, very grounded. He couldn't resist implementing the supernatural a little bit into the 3rd one, but it's still very, very good. And I have to give a shout out to, he's easily one of Stephen King's top 10 villains at this point. If there was 3 different books that featured him, 2 prominently, Brady Hartsfield, man, damn right. Number 8 is going to be a shout out to my boy, Rob Soul. Yes, that's right, Rob. Love you, man. And it's a book called Desperation, and a villainous presence that is arguably on the same level as Pennywise. Yes, that's right. Interdimensional of sorts, kind of. We're talking tack. I don't know, you know, tit for tack or whatever you guys want to say. But in this small Nevada town, which is like just totally... It's desolated, it's deserted, but I mean, when you first meet this character in the Mick Garris adaptation, which is actually better than I think people really want to give it credit for. You have Ron Perlman playing the first incarnation of this character that you see, where he's, or at least a portion of him, is possessing this sheriff and stuff, and his body's decomposing, and it's cool the way this evil presence has to jump from body to body because it speeds up the decomposition process, and the way it was unleashed by these miners, you know, they were Asian miners. I can't remember if they were from China because it's been a long time since I've read this particular book, but yeah, just the way it was unwittingly unleashed, and then the way it just jumps from presence to presence. You know, tack is tack talk. TikTok, tack talk, yeah, no, the TikTok man is not on this list, but Desperation is not one of my favorite Stephen King books, probably not even in my top 10, and Rob's gonna hate me for saying this. It's due for a reread though, but just the extent of the otherworldliness of this villain and the fascinating way in which, and I can't even say it's an it at this point, is able to, you know, just... the writer in it, who is essentially like Stephen King when he was going on his book tours and roaming around on his motorcycle and everything. The cast in this is really, really good in the film, and yeah, the novel is tremendous as well. It's got its sister portion, The Regulators, which has a lot of the same characters, but in a totally different, alternate, you know, Crisis on Infinite Earths type shit, and people die who live in the first one, and so on. And it's also very interesting because the punk rock girl from Rose Madder, who is in the home with Rose, who's a minor character in Rose Madder, actually shows up as, she's like a love interest for the roadie, who is played by the guy from Wings, who was also in, oh man, his name's eluding me, but he was also in the remake of The Shining that they did on ABC, also directed by Mick Garris. So you're seeing a pattern here. But Tack had much room for expansion, and if I remember correctly, there's enough there's enough gray area and if I remember correctly, there's enough gray area in certain aspects at the end where who knows, right? So let's jump to number 7, and number 7 is the first villain that became iconic as far as Stephen King goes. And that's because of the fact that in 76, I believe it was, I really should have written down the year, You had Brian De Palma adapt King's first novel, Carrie, into a feature film, and it's been remade twice. There was also a very crappy sequel called The Rage, Carrie 2, and look out for another Stephen King video that is going to be coming on Hail to Stephen King next year, early next year in January, where it's basically going to be me talking about all of the unnecessary sequels, the direct-to-videos, the mini-series, continuations, and whatever. There are so many to talk about, the Mangler Children of the Corn. We can go on, and I think I've mentioned this before, but Margaret White, the mother of Carrie, that torments this poor girl who has these telekinetic powers, or psychokinetic, I can't remember what the proper terminology is, but essentially she is a gifted girl that is not just tormented in school by villains, and by just mean kids and things like that, but she is tormented even more so at home. And Margaret White was interestingly portrayed by Piper Laurie in the original De Palma film, and not poorly, in my opinion, by Patricia Clarkson in the NBC miniseries remake, which they were trying to turn into a TV series, which is why they changed the ending and all this stuff. But it was like one of those backdoor pilot kind of things, backdoor, as they like to say. But nothing became of it. I gotta say, even though I was not the biggest fan of the Carrie remake with Chloe Grace Moretz or whatever, because I thought she was just maybe too pretty to be Carrie. I don't know. She just didn't have that awkward factor that I thought Sissy Spacek had so perfectly. But I think the best portrayal of Margaret White that we have seen, as far as just a real thespian, just like tackling that shit and making her supremely scary, was Julianne Moore in that remake. She was just borderline diabolical, with just the religious aspect, and the fact that I was raised Reformed Baptist and I've seen misinterpretation and misuse of religion, especially in that stern, spare the rod, spoil the child mentality. And so, yes, Margaret White needs to be on this list, and some people may think she needs to be higher than number 7, which is where, when I get into my number 6, there are going to be calls of blasphemy about this. But this is a Stephen King book that I read earlier this year, and the more I have thought about it, I even think I mentioned recently on Twitter when I was going back and forth with some of the peeps from Cemetery Dance, it's in my top 10 Stephen King books ever. Seriously. And it's right up there. Fucking Revival. That's not the real title, it's just Revival. But I adore this book. It's essentially about a small kid, a young child, this young boy who is in a town that has a very young minister that suddenly shows up. He's got a beautiful wife, beautiful daughter, and he loses his faith after they die in an untimely accident. But the greatest thing about Charles Jacobs, who is this person who has not been put on screen yet, unfortunately, although Josh Boone, who is, he has the New Mutants coming out, and he's also trying to work on an adaptation of The Stand. The thing I find so fascinating about Charles Jacobs is the fact that he is one of those villains that truly believes that what he is doing is right, and that his cause is going to just almost enhance the human race, and he's a mad scientist, essentially, that also was a preacher at one particular point. And the revival aspect is the fact that as he experiments with these secret currents, these electrical currents, I should say, that he is presumably pulling from another world of sorts, some other alternate dimension, of Stephen King's multiverse of sorts. It's very, very Lovecraftian. It's, God, is it fascinating as you see the ups and downs, first and foremost, of this boy who forms a band called the Gunslingers at one point, and he goes out and he becomes a successful musician, but he's a drug addict, and he's trying to kick the smack, and yet the journey of Charles Jacobs, this villain, in the fact that he's going out on these tours almost like Benny Hinn, status, or the guy that Ozzy wrote the Miracle Man song about. It's fascinating seeing just the way his villainousness is just so carefully crafted, and yet not even necessarily something that he's cognizant of. He's a healer, and he thinks that he is doing great things for other people. He heals the protagonist in this book, or at least seemingly he does, and this is one of the few Stephen King books that, as it gets to its crazy crescendo at the end, it does not end well. Like the end. King is fond of his silver linings. This is an ending that I felt was very similar to the Christine ending, the book of Christine, or like the Pet Sematary ending or something like that. And it's really always a bold statement when King decides to go that dark in the finale, in the final pages, in the final words of a book, for God's sake. Charles Jacobs with the religious factor, with the otherworldly factor, with the fact that he believes so strongly in what he's doing. He is a tremendous villain that some might not even necessarily characterize as a villain. And so, if you have not read Revival, holy shit, man. It's probably my favorite Stephen King book of the post-2000s. That's legit right there. Number 5. And I almost put Charles Jacobs above my number 5 because I feel like my number 5 was a villain who started in such a fascinating fashion, and he just, he petered to the finish line. Seriously. And I was so disappointed with the fact that they gave such an interesting setup for him, and then by the time it got to, it all being said and done, he was just like, oh, I'm so silly, I'm throwing bombs at you, oh, you can't get me. Roland, yes, you probably know, if you're a Stephen King fan, who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Crimson King, who, superior of Mr. Randall Flagg, who is pretty much the biggest baddie in the Stephen King universe, at least for me. But the Crimson King was set on a pedestal above. But it was almost like in that new Star Wars movie where, you've got somebody who's like a grand leader, but there's an ambitious person below them who probably has more fire in their belly. But that's beside the point. The Crimson King is originally introduced not in those first few Dark Tower books, even though he plays such a pivotal part in the last 3, and I can't even remember if he's mentioned in The Wind Through the Keyhole. I don't think he is, but, that was between 4 and 5. In Insomnia, when you first start to realize and get introduced to this, this big bad and everything that he entails, and, just the random... the random and the purpose, which is a big theme in Insomnia, and the fact that Insomnia is one of those funny Stephen King books where if you're not up on the lore of his multiverse, you are not going to enjoy it anywhere near as much. I think you would still find appreciation for it, but when I was rereading it, man, you really... you get so much more when you understand the full extent of everything that's that's being connected here. And so the Crimson King and his intertwinement with Roland the Gunslinger is basically laid out here, and then you get so much more of it in 5, 6, and 7. But I felt like after setting somebody up as being just this big bad, like the ultimate bad of the King universe, they do interesting things with him in the 7th book where, Susanna and Oy and Roland finally get to his deserted kingdom and stuff, and there's some great artwork in that too, from the guy who did the original, the very first Gunslinger Dark Tower book. But for me, the Crimson King, when you finally meet him, aside from when you meet him, and when he's I don't know if he's transfixing himself or something above... the place that Deep Nose is going to fly the plane into, or whatever, at the abortion rally and stuff. I felt like the character was done such a disservice after building him up so much, and he's just he's hurling these grenade bomb type things at Roland, and he's laughing maniacally. Some would argue with me that he's gone nuts and he's trapped in the tower. And so, but for somebody who was supposed to be the ultimate bad in the King multiverse, because the Dark Tower connects all of the alternate, universes of King, I was so disappointed. But based on the way he was iconically set up, I can't not mention him in this list. So, number 5, Crimson King. Now, number 4 is one you guys are definitely expecting to be on this list, and you might even want him a little bit higher. We're talking George Stark. George Stark from The Dark Half. This character was essentially King exorcising some demons after having an alter ego of his own named Richard Bachman, where he was doing this experimental thing where he was just like, okay, can I write stories, similar stories, and stuff that I love and believe in? Maybe it has a slighter darker tinge, but that's the one argument that I hear about Bachman stuff all the time from various CRs, various constant readers, and they tell me, they're like, yeah, all the Bachman stuff is just so much darker, and I'm just like, are we reading the same stuff? I know Roadwork is dark. I'd say maybe Rage is probably the darkest of all of the stuff, but I could easily see Thinner being a regular King book. I could easily see The Long Walk being a regular King book. If anything, the sensibilities of King's short stories, where he usually goes for like a Twilight Zone twist ending, that is employed more so in the Bachman stuff. But King had to bury Bachman after his pseudonym, his alter ego, was revealed by an ambitious reporter. And so the awesome thing that King has done throughout his entire career is he uses real life experience and employs it into a horror story or a self-reflective, form of expression, so to speak. And so George Stark is basically played by Timothy Hutton, I believe, in the George Romero film. Tremendous film, in my opinion. Very, very good. And so, and imagine if you had your pseudonym revealed to the world, and then as a big joke, you went and had a fake burial, and oh, he's dead and he's gone, and lo and behold, he shows up as a real person and starts terrorizing you and your family to some degree. This is a really good book and a really good novel. Really good book novel as well. It's very novel, but film adaptation as well. There's a scene, that always sticks with me at the very beginning with the whole Siamese twin aspect, and the eyeball, and when they're doing the open skull, surgery, the brain surgery. Oh man! But just the fact that King created the alter ego that was the much more maniacal, the chain smoking, hard drinking, wanting to just legitimately scare people and inflict terror, and Stark is just so great for that in both the film and the novel. And yeah, I just love the real life connections that it has with King as a whole, and it's a great character, and it's very, very crucial in the lore of King, but also the life of King, and just how reflective it was of that. So George Stark, most definitely. Number 3. Yes, number 3 is a character that is back in vogue officially as of this year. As of the fact that the new incarnation of this character terrorizing children is the highest grossing horror film ever. The book is obviously supremely superior and amazing, but I really liked the 2017 version of it. I still find merit where many others don't in the 1990 miniseries. I still really like that. I don't think the adults are as annoying as a lot of people think, but what it's really all about is Pennywise. Pennywise is your number 3, guys, and he was portrayed this past year by Bill Skarsgård, but he was more iconically for some portrayed by Tim Curry. And that's the thing, this is actually one that people will definitely be arguing about for a long time, because purists who saw the original It miniseries, they still love, as do I, that portrayal by Tim Curry. But Bill Skarsgård brought something new and different to the character. Thankfully, it wasn't a rehash, which was the good thing about it. And so Pennywise obviously has been at work in Derry for not just decades, but like centuries upon centuries. And that's why this villain some people may think he's the number 1 You know, this interdimensional, very similar to Tack, traveler that has been just feasting and sleeping for every 27 years and just going about it and stuff. Probably has the highest body count, if you really want to think about it, as far as, different Stephen King stuff goes. And, I mean, if we're talking, the loggers and the mobsters and all of these different things and all of the kids, and so grisly, too. The one quip that I had with this new incarnation was that he has this amazingly just unique transformational aspect to him that, some people like the painting, and I thought it was a little too conjuring for me, and some people like the dead kid who drowned and stuff like that, but the way they did it in the book, I just have to keep pointing back to the book, because this book is incredible, and just Pennywise is easily, or Mr. Bob Gray, as he calls himself at one particular time, he's definitely he's easily in the top 3. And the one thing that I have to also point out that I loved so much about the new portrayal of Pennywise in this film, the 2017 one that came out this year, was the fact that whereas Tim Curry was basically playing like an evil, maniacal clown of sorts, but it seemed like a person, but Skarsgård brought on that new dimension of the eyes looking away and the drooling and the just kind of like sentences like, petering off and stuff like that. It was very much more so like, as opposed to being an evil person dressed as a clown, he felt like an otherworldly, like some other kind of creature masquerading as a clown, falling out of character. So I adore Pennywise. And also great punk band was named after his character. And so some may argue that this should be at number 1 probably, but I disagree. You guys probably know who my number 1 is, but let's get to number 2. And number 2, since my camera just died and I had to switch some things around, is none other than the woman who was the inception for doing this list. And as somebody who's in, kind of the public eye on our tiny little baby YouTube channel, we have people who take fandom a little excessively sometimes, and it's this is the epitome of it, though, at least for me. I mean, we're talking the fact that Paul Sheldon, a writer who does, he has wanted to break out of the mold so badly, and yet he is most famous for these misery novels about this, turn of the century, like turn of the 18th century, I think, woman in Britain who is named Misery, obviously, and goes on all these different wacky adventures, and Annie Wilkes is obsessed with these particular books, obsessed with the author. She ends up having him in her possession after he gets in an accident in Colorado, and the claustrophobic aspect, the cat and mouse aspect, the fact that she is so much more fucked up in the book with cutting off his foot and his thumb and just all the other horrible things that she does to him, they soften the character, whereas Kathy Bates did an amazing job, but they softened the character as they kind of had to, for the film. And so just imagine if you're successful and your most obsessive fan is like holding you hostage, and Stephen King, the best-selling author in the world, at least at the time, he's been surpassed now by J.K. Rowling. You can only think, man, sympathize with the guy. I wish I had more time to talk about this, but I'm not trying to make this like a 45-minute video of sorts, but Annie Wilkes scares the crap out of me, and the just final confrontation between the two of them when he finishes writing this revisionist novel specifically for her after killing off her favorite character, and then the only thing that's keeping him alive is by writing specifically for his number 1 fan. I mean, it's intense. It is such a good book. It is easily one of King's best. I still probably wouldn't put it in my top 10 because I still prefer the supernatural aspect for King, but as far as doing a grounded story that is terrifying, this is probably my 11 or 12. It's like right there. Who knows? If I read it again, it might shift up in the rankings. So now we move to number 1. You guys all know who my number 1 is. It's the number 1 Stephen King villain ever. It's the guy who has crossed more boundaries and more stories than anybody, and that's why I am so fervently excited to briefly discuss him. We're talking Randall fucking Flagg, man. We are talking the walking dude. We are talking, I mean, he's Richard Ferris, as he was calling himself earlier this year in Wendy's Button Box. This is a guy who has been in more King stories as a villain than anybody else. We're talking The Eyes of the Dragon. We're talking initially introduced in The Stand, which is in my top 3 King books ever. Cannot wait for that new adaptation, and very, very excited to reread The Stand in 2018 and do a 40th anniversary with you guys. He was portrayed on the big screen by Jaime Sheridan, who you guys have seen on Homeland recently. That guy's a pretty damn good actor, man, and I honestly, in that ABC miniseries that Garrus did, I thought he was pretty on point with his mullet and all that stuff. But Randall Flagg, guys, seriously, I decided that I wanted to start reading all of King's stuff because of Randall Flagg. I don't know if I've ever spelled it out that directly here. I've always said that, oh, I realized that all the King stuff interlocked, and so I just wanted to get the full extent of the... No, the real impetus behind it was the fact that Randall Flagg, for me, was the most compelling Stephen King villain I had ever seen, you know, beyond a resurrected child like Gage in Pet Sematary, beyond, you know, a Barlow, like I mentioned earlier, or, you know, or a haunted hotel, whatever. Randall Flagg had so much character, he had so much presence, and just the fact that I read up on him showing up in medieval times in Garland and in the Dark Tower series and all of these other things, I was like, okay, I have to start reading everything Stephen King because I adore Randall Flagg. I've cosplayed as the dude, for God's sake. So, I mean, he crosses so many boundaries. I love his charisma. The one thing that I have to say, and this is a spoiler, I hate the way King did off with him in the Dark Tower series. Very similar to the way that I felt he gave the Crimson King a disservice in the 7th volume. For your most iconic villain in all of your work, in your entire career, to have some spider baby be his undoing and stuff, and it still pisses me off to think about it now. But that's the interesting thing about him, is that, you know, he's killed in The Stand, you know, he's killed in the Dark Tower, all spoilers also, sorry guys, I told you this was going to be kind of spoilery, but he has some odd energy of regeneration and, you know, showing up in different places and stuff like that, and he has a very snide whimsy. I mean, shit, he's under a different name, presumably, or so I'm pretty certain of, in The Wind Through the Keyhole. You know, I love his presence in that. So, yeah, Randall Flagg, guys, that is, for me, the #1 and the most iconic Stephen King villain ever. You're probably not that surprised that I'm saying that. So, let's count them down real quick here, because this is going to be a very, very long video. So, number 10, Leland Gaunt from Needful Things, Gaunt, yes, I know. Brady Hartsfield, number 9, from Mr. Mercedes Trilogy. Number 8 is Tack from Desperation. Shout out to Rob once again. Number 7 is Margaret White from Carrie. Number 6 is Charles Jacobs from Revival, which you all need to read as soon as possible. It's amazing. Number 5, The Crimson King. I could have even put him up higher. I felt he was an underdeveloped big bad, and it's always disappointing. He was almost like a Marvel villain in some ways, where, you know, he's built up and you think he's going to be so badass, and then he's nothing. Number 4, George Stark from The Dark Half, the Stephen King alter ego, chain-smoking and terrorizing guy. Number 3, Pennywise, a.k.a. Bob Gray, a.k.a. the creature from another dimensional world or whatever from It. Number 2, Annie Wilkes. Probably as far as the real-world villain, the grounded villain, the most frightening that you will ever see in anything Stephen King. She is scary as shit. And then number 1, obviously, Randall Flagg. So I gotta ask all of you to subscribe here to The Horror Show and extend a grande gracias. I'm Jaime in Fuego, and you can find me on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Follow, like, share, subscribe. More Hail to Stephen King coverage coming every Saturday now through the end of the year, and then next year it is going to be twice a week, so you have that to look forward to. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more for more discussion about El Rey, as I call him, Hasta luego, sin amigos. I hope it is sooner rather than later. But yes, make certain that you make the time and read Stephen King. And stay scared too. Yeah, that's always important.